annual Action Forum second public event series. At each Action Forum, fellows make action pledges of things that they're going to do in the world to make the world a better place. And I'd like to invite up to the stage fellows who made action pledges in 2013 and would like to share their updates. Thank you.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. I am John Dacey. I have the privilege of being the superintendent of schools in Los Angeles, and I am from the inaugural class of the Education Entrepreneurs Pahara Group. My pledge was to work to raise four-year cohort graduation rates to more than 70% in Los Angeles. I'll share with you the 4 planks we were successful in this year. I can't lift youth out of poverty and graduate them if their parents also live in poverty. One of my 11 unions is SEIU, and we negotiated a very historic and controversial agreement. More than 35,000 of our employees are our parents, and minimum wage was $8 an hour. We just signed our contract to move it to $15 an hour, which is the highest in the country. We also know that students need access to powerful courses, and we put a huge effort into our AP courses. We saw our enrollment decline by 13%, but we saw a 36% increase in AP first-time takers. That's more than 7,000 a year taking AP courses who have not. We also have to keep students in school, and suspension has been an enormous issue. So this year we wrote policies that prohibited the use of willful defiance to suspend a single student in LA and instituted restorative justice techniques. Our suspensions went from 48,000 to 9,000, and more students are staying in, and we are not pushing them out. And lastly, lastly, when all else fails and students' rights are abridged, we went to the courts. And in a historic trial called Vergara, we went to the courts and basically petitioned that the 5 laws in California that appropriately protect adult rights were violating students' rights. And after a 33-day trial, the judge found the laws that govern the firing and removal of teachers, governing tenure, and governing the law which is about last in, first out. Every one of the 5 was struck down as unconstitutional against the rights of students. That court case, it continues to be appealed. I began the year in my work in LAUSD 4 years ago when our graduation rate was in the 50%. This year we closed the year with a 69% graduation rate. So my pledge this year will be to continue to keep my job for another year. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Hildegard Vasquez. I'm from Panama. I'm a member of the Central America Leadership Initiative. I'm an architect and the head of HV, but I'm also the president of a foundation I created called Fundación Calicanto, where we run a training program for women. My action pledge last year was to expand the vision that educating women is the answer to creating positive change. Since then, we have continued to train 120 women in Panama City. We have started scaling up the process by creating a tool that measures if a community is ready for a CAPTA program. We have written and defined the CAPTA model and packaged it to be used as a franchise. We have initiated talks with the Panamanian government and the IDB to take CAPTA to scale. We have signed agreements to make CAPTA Guatemala happen. And so, to make you all join the movement, when you change a woman, you change a family. When you change a family, you change communities. When you change communities, you change countries. And why not? Let's all get together to change the world.
Hi, I'm Adam Lowry. I'm the founder of Method Products, and my action pledge was to build a world-class sustainable manufacturing facility in the US Midwest to manufacture our products. I'm happy to report that that facility is well underway. If you want to see it in construction, you can see a picture of it at reception at the Aspen Meadows Resort. We have purchased a 22-acre site, and we have a 150,000 square foot building already constructed. We're now building the inside of it. It'll be open in December. It will be the second LEED Platinum certified manufacturing facility anywhere in the United States, the only in our industry. When it opens in December, it will be, it'll have 800 kilowatts of on-site renewable power in wind and solar. So it'll be carbon neutral, water neutral, and landfill free when it opens. And it'll also have 2 acres of greenhouses on the roof growing fresh leafy greens for the community, and will provide 100 green manufacturing jobs for a community that desperately needs it. So I invite you all to come to Chicago. It will be open to the public for tours, and come check it out early next year. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Malveaux. I'm a member of the 21 Lassos Henry Crown Fellows, and also a correspondent for CNN. And my action pledge was to use my public platform to bring awareness and hope and support research for those with Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS. I, over the course of the year, produced a 3-part series featuring 3 people who have ALS, including my mother. And we put that on CNN and CNN International, and so it was basically throughout the world. It was broadcast, and also created a website called Malveaux mission.org to bring awareness and, again, to help support research, funding research to find a cure. And over the last year or so, it got picked up by social media and Twitter and really resonated in the ALS community. It also garnered awards, some journalism awards, so I traveled throughout the country and was able to present the story once again and give updates on my mother and how she's doing. And we continue to do that as well. Also, I ended up just moving to DC to be closer to my mom during this time. And what wasn't on my action plan, but kind of required some action, was I became a mom. But not that kind of action. I adopted. 8 weeks ago, so I have a brand new baby girl. Thank you. All right, so for our next action, we're going to get up here. We're going to start this panel. We're going to kick it off, very provocative. Be Disruptive, the Life and Legacy of Nelson Mandela. We have a fascinating group of panelists who are here. I'm really sorry that it's only 30 minutes, so we're going to have to really kind of push to move through some of these things. We've got a lot to talk about, and we certainly want to open it up for Q&A as much as possible, so you'll be able to weigh in and ask questions as well. So let's get started with our panelists. First, want to bring up Ferial, Haffajee. And by the way, it took everybody about 32 hours to get here, so we have to applaud them, just the effort that it took just to be here. She is editor-in-chief of South Africa's City Press. She is a fellow of the second class of the African Leadership Initiative in South Africa, as well as a moderator for the Aspen Global Leadership Network. She has been covering Mandela for many, many, many years. In the early years as well, she says, when she was a very young journalist. We're not going to ask her how old she is today, but we welcome. Also with us today, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, and he is a South African Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town. He's also pastored Mandela, and he, in 2008, was awarded the Cross of St. Augustine. It is the second highest international award for outstanding service to the Anglican Communion. So we welcome him as well. And finally, Leslie Massdorp. He worked as a policy advisor for Mandela's administration, public policy. He also later served in the business community 13 years, active in global investment banking. His last position serving as president of Bank of America Merrill Lynch for Southern Africa. Welcome. All right. So we want to start really quickly here. You all know Nelson Mandela quite well, in some ways quite intimately. In your experiences as a journalist, I did not have that opportunity. Just met him twice briefly. A flight from Ethiopia to Zimbabwe when the pilot announced there was a dignitary on board, and Nelson and Winnie Mandela appeared, and it was just a beautiful moment. We had a chance to meet him, and also, of course, Bill Clinton's trip to South Africa when Nelson Mandela was able to give the tour of Robben Island and the cell where he stayed and was able to share in that moment. I want to talk a little bit about what this theme is, being disruptive. And we looked up the definition, so just bear with us here. Disruptive meaning characterized by unrest or disorder or insubordination. Similar words include tumultuous, turbulent, riotous, and troubled. So we want to talk about this, and we'll begin with you, Thabo, here. So Nelson Mandela, given the Xhosa name, which means troublemaker. He also, later in life, was known as Madiba, or father. Tell us, in your experience, as one who knows him and knew him intimately, what is it? Parts disruptor and parts paternal figure?
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Nelson Mandela's Xhosa name is Rolihlahla. Rolihlahla, you write, means troublemaker, or translated literally means dragging trees or uprooting trees. So already he was given a name to be a disruptive leader. But I just want to answer that question with a story, and just briefly, during his dying days, when I went to go and offer a prayer, I said to him, when there was a long queue of people wanting to meet and chat with him, don't you feel tired with these people that come and shake your hand and greet you? He was so upset with me, and he said, Thabo, tired? How can people make you tired? People energize me. So that for me was a character of Nelson Mandela that showed that humanity matters, people mattered, and it actually showed his fatherly, his tender aspect, that he can confront, but confront with love.
And how much of that do you think was really rooted in his morals, in his values, or how much of it do you think was political, strategic?
I think most of that was rooted in his deep belief that humanity matters. His deep belief that all of us reflect the spark of something good, that each one of us can and should make a change to make this world a better place. Of course, his context politically did give him the framework to see the opposite, where people were demeaned, where people were discriminated against, and it evoked not anger within him, but it evoked a sense of a better world than the one he was experiencing.
And Leslie, you and I talked about this before, his ability to not to be vengeful, to get over the pettiness and the resentments that are so part of our human instincts. How did he do that? And can we as a group here do that? Can we be Mandela-like, do you think?
I think we could start by putting everybody in jail for 27 years and see whether that helps. On a more serious note, I do think that prison had a very profound impact and shaped him. I think the sort of instinct around his instinctive response, reconciliation, I don't think Mandela had a light bulb moment where he suddenly realized when at some point he's released that reconciliation would be the principal platform from which to unite South Africa. I think this happened over those long suffering years in prison. If you read Mandela's book, Long Walk to Freedom, and if those who were interviewed around the Rivone treason trialist, he was quite volatile when he went into prison. In fact, Walter Sisulu, who was his mentor, had a much more of a calming effect on him. So I guess what I'm saying, Suzanne, is that prison in many ways became for him a microcosm of South Africa, the manner in which he related to the prison guards, seeing their humanity beneath the sort of brutality. I think it was through those long years that he developed the sort of vision of where or what is possible with South Africa. And I think that when he came out, for me, one of the most powerful things about Mandela is the way in which he utilized symbols and metaphors to get a message across. So not through long speeches, but just through using symbols and powerful gestures to tell a story.
Can you give us an example?
When Mandela was released, or let's take his inauguration, Mandela invited his prison warders to his inauguration. He had tea with the widow of Betsy Verwoerd, who was the widow of the architect of apartheid. Dr. Verwoerd was one of the key intellectual drivers of apartheid. There were just so many instances. I think for me, the one that stands out is around 1993, during the death of Chris Hani. Chris Hani, for those of you who don't know, was probably the most popular leader after Mandela in South Africa. He was assassinated exactly 1 year before the elections, and Mandela used his assassination to unite the country. So I'll tell the story very briefly. So he addressed the nation because President de Klerk at the time had no real legitimacy from the old South African population. So Mandela was on all the televisions and addressed the nation, literally appealing for calm, appealing for people not to take the country to the precipice of disaster. And the story he told, he sort of changed the entire narrative around this assassination. He made the center of the story the woman who reported the incident to the police, and she happened to be of Afrikaans origin. So his address started something like this: my fellow South Africans, today I stand before you to advise you that Chris Hani has been killed. An assassin, he referred to the assassin as a foreigner. It's also a very interesting observation. This guy lived in South Africa for many years, but he was not born in South Africa. So he isolated him as a sort of foreigner. So he was able to take a tragic event and turn it around into a one to unite the country.
And Leslie, tell us about the living legacy that he's left behind. You covered very recently, July 18th, the 67 minutes of service that is the global movement that he left behind. Talk a little bit about his legacy, and whether or not it's really accurate, the way people portray it, because you yourself said you were concerned that some people see him as godlike, as saintly, and that too is not necessarily the case.
So I'll first speak about how joyful his birthday on July 18th this year was. And it came up against the stark contrast of his birthday last year, when I think he began the final process of dying. And it was a long and painful death until he eventually died in December. And for the 7 months, we've been a little bit, I felt, unhinged without him. Although Mr. Mandela Madiba had resigned from public life many years ago, there was the feeling that he'd now left. We have to carry this legacy. And I think people really rose to the occasion very, very beautifully. What he asked for was not to be memorialized by statues or street names or anything. And long ago, he said that he wanted it to be remembered in service. So on July 18th this year, many South Africans, millions, took very seriously the entreaty to do 67 minutes of service. And it was wonderful to watch as a journalist, young and old, rich and poor, across the country, from his hometown to the center of the cities, everybody doing their 67 minutes. I think that is the most wonderful bequeathment. He's made us a nation in service of his memory, not only in statues. On how we think of him, I was very concerned when he died that he shouldn't only be remembered as a saint, a kind of teddy bear feel-good figure, and that actually he was greatly disruptive as a person, and in there come very many lessons for my life. So he took up the armed struggle when it was very, very unpopular to do so as a young leader. And then when he came out of prison, he told young soldiers of the revolution to throw their guns in the ocean. When he realized that nationalizing industry, a cornerstone of ANC policy, was going to be disastrous for our new economy, He went against his party and all elements of it to say that wasn't the right thing to do. And I could give you very many examples of where he didn't do the comfortable or the politically powerful thing to do, but he did do the right thing for us.
And you recently, just last month, had a chance to talk with his widow, Graça Michel. Does she agree? Does she think that the world, that the way he is perceived, that this is a legacy that is really reflective of who he was as a man, his vision, and what he was able to accomplish in his lifetime?
So Ms. Graça Michel had just come out of mourning when I interviewed her a couple of days before, and she's a very authoritative, beautiful person. If she walks into a room, you notice her. She owns the room. You detected in her a sadness, and she said very clearly that she has lost her best friend, her gorgeous husband. Those were her words. She said he was very gorgeous, got better as he got older, obviously.
That's nice.
Absolutely. And the thing that I loved is that their love came together on their vision for African children. And I think that's how they carved their relationship. And I think she is building and he has built a legacy of caring for children.
Leslie, I want to go back to you and talk a little bit about this notion of economic disruption, his legacy that way. At the time of his campaign for his election, he approached at least 20 very powerful corporate business leaders in South Africa. They contributed $245,000 each to his campaign, and there were a lot of people who didn't know quite what to make of what he was doing, and some of his black allies were disturbed by this. Later, his economic programs would be very reflective of what the World Bank and the IMF were looking for, foreign investment. If you are somebody who's going to be disruptive, how do you manage that? How do you manage the business world and the business community and still be someone who is a troublemaker?
I wish it was possible to ask Mr. Mandela directly these questions, because if one just think, if you come out of prison after 27 years, firstly just to adapt to the sort of modern world, to understand how modern economy works. I mean, the one aspect of Mandela's imprisonment that people sometimes forget is the fact that he actually started the negotiations or the discussions with government way back in 1985. There were 71 recorded meetings between him and the Minister of Justice, where we could see, and the Minister of Intelligence. So there was at least a process of him beginning to understand the sort of the modern political establishment. With respect to the economy, I don't think that Mandela's greatest legacy resides in the sort of economic domain. I think Mandela's legacy is around uniting South Africa, getting all of us to imagine, South Africans black and white, to imagine a new future when everything was falling apart around us. That really is his precise legacy. You would not find in the economic policies of the ANC or the transition in 1994 the specific sort of ink and pen of Mandela's views. What he was able to do with established business was to, if he approached the CEO in what you've mentioned for the campaign and so on, if he approached people to make contributions in the education sector, for example, there was not a single CEO who could ever say no. He just had this disarming charm and this ability to, and a presence and command. So I think his real legacy will be felt through all of the hundreds of schools that were built by companies, resourcing dysfunctional schools and so on.
Thabo, I'd like to bring it back to the realm of truth and reconciliation, which was really a big part of what he wanted to do in bringing the country, moving the country forward. Do you think that forgiveness, the act of forgiving, can be disruptive?
Yes, the act of forgiving can be very disruptive, because when you forgive the wrongdoer, you are saying to him, you matter. And the wrongdoer will easily paint themselves in a particular position and get themselves into trouble and go and find systems and policies, as in apartheid times, that said to Mandela, you're not a human being. But then Nelson Mandela was saying to those that incarcerated him, you are important. You deserve the dignity that each person deserves. And in so doing, the wrongdoer had to look at Mandela and say, who is this one? I mean, he's been incarcerated for a very long time, but yet forgiving. So forgiveness can disarm the one that has wronged you. And that is why in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, South Africans were given an opportunity to look at those that maimed and killed their family members in the eye and give them the space to say, I have erred. And that is a very powerful position for one who has been hurt, to get the detail, to learn the story of how their loved ones were killed and maimed. And so, but forgiveness without repentance, excuse me, if you ask an archbishop, I'll throw some of those biblical terms. But forgiveness without, maybe let me call it the bicycle story. The bicycle story is, if you steal somebody's bicycle and you go to their home riding that bicycle and say, I am so sorry for having stolen your bicycle. Forgive me, but you want to ride the bicycle back home. That is a problem. So first give them the bicycle, and then ask for forgiveness that you had stolen the bicycle. So forgiveness, yes, can be disruptive because you want the one that had stolen to return the bicycle.
I want to bring this forward to what we're seeing today in today's world. And Ferial, I'd like you to address this before we open it up for questions. But you and I had talked about this before, and you said that South Africa's struggle once seemed as intractable as the Middle East conflict. You had also stated that South Africa could have become a Ukraine. So explain to us, if you will, the lessons learned, the approach, the strategy that Mandela used that we could apply today, whether it's in the Middle East or Ukraine, to get out of these kinds of revolutionary conflicts.
I know they're very different things. And as South Africans, we're a very noisy nation because we're still fighting a lot about the bicycles and who really owns them. But when you look back, when I look at Palestine and Israel, when I look at the Ukraine or Syria or Iraq, and see the failure to make a working nation, I again marvel at how Madiba took us and made us see that I am my sister or brother's keeper, that my interest is your interest. Because really, I do think that our country could have, it could have been fractured, it could have been broken. There were people who wanted their own homelands, their own areas. In fact, they still do. But I think what he has bequeathed to us is largely a working nation, a troubled one, but one that's unified and where we do see ourselves as South African. That for me was a core lesson that I think I can see if people tried that in the other places where we are seeing nationalist or identity politics, there are lessons in that leadership.
I'd like to open it up to our audience, if you will, if you have questions. I know that we have microphones that are on both sides. Is there anybody who has a question? We can continue on with ours, or is anybody right now burning to ask? Yes, sir.
What was there in Mandela's childhood that made him what he is, what he was?
Anyone can take that?
I'll just say something very briefly from what I've read. I think that the fact that Mandela came from a family of chiefs, and in African culture, chiefs are people of authority who have to listen to people's grievances, they have to respect people, and through the listening, obviously search for consensus. I think that it's clear from Long Walk to Freedom and the way he described his own upbringing that shaped him to a degree. So the desire to search for consensus and having the sort of self-confidence certainly informed his later years. I mean, there are stories in Long Walk to Freedom which suggest that even when he arrived there, he was such a natural leader, maybe because of his sheer physicality and sort of that people always, if they had to queue, he would naturally be the first person in the line. If the line would start wherever he was standing. And he never said people should queue behind him. it just so happened that they would naturally form there. And that comes from the stature which he commanded.
I just also wanted to add the fact that he went to Methodist school. So there was royalty and a bit of, you know, in those days, my other name is Cecil, you know, from Cecil John Rhodes. When you went to register in an Anglican school, I said, well, I'm Thabo, my dear Makhanyu. They say, what? No, your name is Cecil. So that's where he also gained his English name from a Methodist school, Nelson. So I just wanted to add Christian values from that context. Thank you.
All right. I understand that you have a question as well up front here. If you could just grab a mic. Young woman right here.
Thank you. If Mandela was trying to get the leaders of Middle East to the table to talk and help them reach a solution for Middle East, what would he tell them?
Divine inspiration.
Put him on the spot.
I don't have divine inspiration, but the Middle East, I think he's spoken before on the question of the Middle East, and I wouldn't want to second guess, but I think somebody did say earlier on that the people of the Middle East, like in South Africa, need to show the political will. They need to mobilize the others. And we had a Freedom Charter. Mandela was not an entity on his own. He worked within his political formation. He encouraged churches, encouraged schools, encouraged other communities to dream of this South Africa where each individual thrived, where there was peace and where there was equality. And perhaps my message, rather than paraphrase Mandela, would really to re-echo that, to say, let the people in the Middle East, particularly in Palestine, Israel, give a lead and invite the rest of the world to a particular destiny.
One of the elements of our transition that I think is pretty remarkable is the extent to which Mandela preached a philosophy of needing to understand and respect the other side. So Mandela in prison learned Afrikaans. Afrikaans was associated with as the language of the oppressor, if you like. But that was he didn't just learn to speak the language, he studied the history, he tried to understand Afrikaans culture. So he was able to see much deeper, right? So it would be the equivalent of Hamas or Hezbollah learning Hebrew and speaking to Mr. Netanyahu or Mr. Perez in Hebrew and sort of having a deep respect for their symbols. So in our national anthem, for example, we incorporated in God Bless Africa and Nkosi Sikelel' Africa, which is our anthem, we included elements of the old Afrikaans apartheid distem, which was the anthem of the old South Africa. Now, it was a small political concession, but it had huge ripple effects because everybody, white and black South Africans, felt included. So there's a lot to do with just beginning to understand the essence of the other side.
I understand there's another question in the audience.
Do you feel now, after Mandela has passed, that this has created a vacuum of leadership in South Africa, or are there new leaders actually taking his teachings and moving the country forward, even with new teachings or new ways of actually making South Africa a country that can move forward?
Ferial, do you want to address that?
I think that it was going to be very hard for anybody to follow Madiba, and that it's probably not in our lifetimes, at least, will we see another leader like that. On our smaller panel yesterday, Dele Olajedi asked whether we set ourselves up for failure by holding him as the standard. But I think when you have lived under a president like that, it's incumbent upon you not to accept the mediocre and to constantly hold that as the standard. In our country, I think that kind of leadership for the foreseeable future will come from sectors other than government.
Any other questions on this side? Yes, sir. You're in the middle.
Given the tensions that you referred to that still exist in parts of South Africa and the sort of disillusionment that we will still hear about in certain parts of the country, do you think that he left the presidency too soon?
You know, given the body politic in Africa and the history of the dictatorship and the history of certain African leaders that have changed the constitution, and some are still in power. Sorry to the Ugandians here. I think President Nelson Mandela was setting a very good precedent in doing his part at the right time and stepping down.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Mandela was released when he was 70, he turned 71 that year. He was already quite advanced in his years. I mean, after 27 hard years in prison. It was a very powerful signal to have. He sent that signal right when he was inaugurated that he will stand for one term. So there was no doubt in anyone's mind about him running for a second term, because our constitution does actually allow him to serve for a second term. But he knew and all along that he wanted to create a platform for new leaders within the ANC to emerge. And I don't think it would have been the right thing for the ANC to propel him to stay beyond his desire.
Yes, there's a gentleman right there.
Do you see any current leaders on the world stage that embody any or some of the characteristics or gravitas?
That was just my next question. Go ahead.
I was thinking about that because Suzanne had asked us to prepare. For me, there are two at the moment, and maybe I'm not looking deeply enough. I think it would be Pope Francis. I'm pretty inspired by him. I know that there are issues still to be dealt with. And then there's the Uruguayan president. Is it Jose Mujica? Somebody can help me? Mujica, thank you. Who lives a very simple life, who drives a Beetle, who gives 90% of his salary away to the poor. For me, those are two inspirational figures.
Anyone else?
Yes, for me it was also Pope Francis, but having been to Aspen for the first time, so I think you've changed me. I think I can see a lot, a lot of leaders here, and yeah.
It's difficult for me to come up with any other name. I would just say that I think leaders are sort of products of circumstance and context, and a particular context gave rise to a Nelson Mandela, and it's almost unfair to suggest that anyone else would live up to that standard. But as I said, we could start with putting some of our current leaders in jail.
Whoa, there's a provocative. That's disruptive. There's a gentleman up at the front here with a question right in the front row.
I was wondering if South Africa is a pluralistic society made up of many different groups, or just has a few groups, because I understand that can affect when there's conflict, the social dynamics of resolving conflict. In cases where there's just a few groups, it can be more difficult to resolve, like the Hindus and Muslims, and what was now India and Pakistan, in other conflicts in Ireland, Catholics and Protestants, Israel, Palestinians, and the Jews, and it's a different type of dynamic. Is it more pluralistic, or is it more like these other situations?
Apartheid was wrong and evil, but some of the products are exactly that we were able to walk with gay, straight, married, unmarried, conscientious objectors, white, blue, you name it. And as the religious community, we were able to work with the Jews, the Muslims, and within the Muslims, the different affiliations, Christians, all types of Christians. We've got Greeks, Portuguese, you name it. So the diversity in South Africa is not like a little powder spread there. It is real, and particularly within the religious sector. But we've got a very strong interreligious formation that addresses some of the ills in the country. We don't look at doctrinal issues because those are very divisive. We look at how can we, as this multi-faith, interreligious or ecumenical body, be of service to South Africa.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to continue the conversation because we run out of time. I want to just very briefly give you a couple of little facts about Mandela as we go, as we think forward about being disruptive, things you may or may not know. As a child, he had herded cattle. He loved to box, garden, and long-distance running. He, as an adult, of course, woke up at 5 in the morning every day, walked every day, kept a routine. That he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he made up his own bed till the very end. He loved to entertain some celebrities, including Michael Jackson, Whoopi Goldberg, and the Spice Girls. He had several wardrobe changes a day, and by the time of June 2004, he was 85 years old, and his health was failing, and he announced that he was retiring from retirement, that he was retreating from public life. He literally said, "Don't call me, I will call you." And so in the age of social media, Twitter, Facebook, 24-hour cable, and oversharing, that in and of itself was an act of disruption. So we want you all to just think about ways that you in your own life, whether it's personal, small, big, your goals, that you too can disrupt. And thank you for thinking about and studying the lessons and the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Thank you very much. Skip Battle will present our next panel. Thank you very much to our panelists as well. Thank you.
I've always said I would follow Suzanne Malveaux anywhere. I didn't realize it might be as an interviewer. Okay, this topic is about disruptive business, and we have three fellows, each of whom leads a disruptive business. And I'll ask Calvin, thank you. Calvin Chin, Anousheh Ansari, and Adam Lowry to tell you a little bit about each of their businesses, and then we'll ask a couple of questions.
Great, thanks, Skip. So my name's Calvin Chin. I'm a proud member of the China Fellows Program. Thanks to my peers who are sticking around to cheer me on. They all came over and said, "Jiao." Just to tell you a little bit about my background and how I ended up doing the business that I currently do. So you could detect from my English, I'm a Chinese American, proudly born in Michigan. But for the last 10 years, I've been based in China. First as a hardware entrepreneur and then a software web entrepreneur. And my last web startup was actually focused on a social purpose. We built a platform to do crowdfunding of student loans and help Chinese students, particularly in the West, afford higher education. And from that experience, we got connected with these ideas around social impact and business with purpose. So now for the last 3 years, getting a little caught up, we've been investing in similar companies with a company we call Transist. And so how do we take companies, tech startups, with a social purpose and help them scale? We do it in 3 ways. First, we invest seed capital, generally the first outside capital, very risk tolerant. We're working with early stage companies in areas such as green roofing, clean cook stoves, mobile education for factory workers, and we're providing the capital and the mentorship to help them grow. But we also find entrepreneurs and teams that aren't quite ready to really fundraise, and we'll incubate them. We'll bring them in, help them fill out their team, help them build product. And in that category of incubation, we worked on mobile education, early science apps for kids, and also a really cool, interesting social network for art lovers in art education. And lastly, one of the new programs that we're super excited about, and maybe not disruptive, but maybe transformative for our thinking and hopefully for the way business works in China, we started accelerating. And so we've taken a batch of companies and we've partnered with a big multinational and its corporate foundation, in this case, Shell Foundation. So the big oil company and its corporate foundation is now working with startups, using our network, our access to the community, and taking a batch of companies, giving them seed capital, but also access to the resources of Shell Corporation, and to engage and have the additional technical skill, marketing, operational skill to really grow those businesses and grow their impact. And for us, just in a word, I guess, what we're really trying to transform or disrupt is two things, I think, around expectations. One, the expectations of traditional business and how their core product or service could really embed solving social purpose in their engagement with stakeholders. And two, the financial performance of social ventures. We think this is actually the most interesting category for seed investors in China to find great teams, find great products that are serving really big market opportunities.
Thank you. Anousheh.
So I'm a fellow of the Middle East Leadership Group, and I live a double life. My business hour life revolves around technology, and when I have free time, then I pursue another passion which is related to space. So first I'm going to focus and talk about my daytime passion, which is a company that I formed about 7 years ago called Prodea. And the genesis of the idea was as people who use technology all the time, we realized that there's a pattern developing, that we are becoming more and more dependent on technology, but also what was happening slowly, we were giving up certain things without noticing them. We were giving up control, we were giving up privacy, security, and somehow it became something that was okay, that we felt that this is a price we have to pay for the convenience we gain from the use of these technologies. And at Prodea, we basically questioned why that is. Is there a way to have all the benefits of these technologies without having to give up all those rights and conveniences and controls? We also wanted to make sure that we don't sacrifice quality, so you would still receive the quality that you wanted from the technologies and services and apps that you use, but without giving up all of those. So in order to do that, we had to basically sit back and look at the core of the different services and technologies and peel the onion and understand where the challenges lied and see if we can solve those challenges without increasing costs. And that's what we did. We built a platform to just provide that type of platform where you can benefit and use and enjoy those technologies without giving up those controls and privacy that any one of us would require. And in order to get that to the market, we then had to question the business model. And is there a way that people would pay for it? Because right now we're used to a lot of free things. So in combination of technologies that we developed and cost reduction and bringing service providers to the table, we were able to disrupt the business model and be able to create a way to achieve all those goals and objectives into what we deliver at Prodea.
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, so I'm Adam. So I'm Adam Lowry, and I started Method Products, which is a company, we make cleaning products. And if there's ever an industry in this world that needs to be disrupted, the world of cleaning products is that industry. It's about as ugly, boring, toxic as it gets. Method is now the largest and fastest growing company in the household cleaning product sector in the world. And I started it 14 years ago in my apartment with a friend of mine. And I think the reason that I think we've gotten to where we're going, which is still far from where we need to be, is because we've been disruptive on a couple of different levels, and I'll just call out a couple. We were really one of the first brands, for those of you that have never seen a Method product at retail before, that brought together deep sustainability with really beautiful high design. And we did that 15 years ago before that was sort of an idea that was popular. And as a result, what we did is we really disrupted the traditional model of consumer products, which is a marketing model. So The consumer products companies of today are marketing companies. They identify an unmet need, they develop a product for it that's generally pretty unremarkable, and then they market to you over and over and over again until you can't forget that brand when you go into the store. What we've done is we invest in the product, and we just make the product better. Better first in its performance, in its sustainability, in its design, its fragrance, all of the different facets of the product experience. A really simple idea, but one that just nobody's really done in a commodity sector like ours. So that's really disrupted the CPG model, because what it means is that we don't have to spend all that money marketing our brand like other people do. It's also disrupted the traditional green business. Green cleaning products have been around for a long time, a lot longer than Method's been around. But they've generally been ugly, they don't work, they're too expensive, they're brown. They're all based around sort of sacrifice. And this is, I think, a big reason why, so we operate on 3 different continents. The 2 biggest are Europe and in North America. And in both places, the green cleaning market is 4% of the overall cleaning market. So for every 1 bottle of green cleaner, Method or any other brand, there are 24 others that aren't. So I think it's pointless to market green products to green people. And the way we've disrupted the green industry is by creating mainstream relevance for a product that happens to be green. Because what we do is we build the sustainability just in an aspect of the quality of the product, not in the way it's marketing. There's no green leaves, there's no pictures of the product, there's no green eco blah blah on the thing. And then I think the last thing that we've disrupted is probably, it's what excites me the most, and it's what I think is most profound about what we're doing, is the way we're trying to use business to create good in the world. So our business is a benefit corporation, which is a new corporate form in the United States where legally I have the opportunity and also the obligation to not only maximize shareholder returns, but to maximize social and environmental returns in addition to that. It's a relatively new movement, but one that's growing, and incidentally came out of a Cato Fellowship project years ago. So, but what that really means is redefining the role of business in creating societal and environmental good. And there's a whole host of things that we do to try to manifest that.
Thank you. So, thank you. So Calvin, you're becoming. Some people are bi-coastal, and you're becoming bi-continental. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Skip. I'm going to be spending a little bit more time in Silicon Valley going forward. So, as I mentioned, born and raised in the U.S., but I would say fairly, having moved to Shanghai in 2004 with a new wife and setting up our life there, we had 2 kids born there. Shanghai really does feel like home. In 2004, I think the rationale for us, in some measure, was that it seemed like, as far as China had already gone since its opening up, that there was still a tremendous opportunity for international ideas, certainly overseas Chinese, to come and bring technology, ideas, processes, values, and really help and engage with where China was at that time. Now, 10 years later, I think there's a tremendous opportunity, as China's continued its growth and its rise and its miracle, to take Chinese ideas, Chinese technology, and some of Chinese values to the rest of the world. So we're really excited, professionally speaking, to have more connections between China and the US. And I think those of us who, hopefully having spent enough time in both places, have enough ability and hopefully then enough responsibility to engage in that connection.
So what would be the values and approaches that you would be bringing to Silicon Valley that they would be enthusiastic about accepting?
Enthusiasm, I'm going to let other people judge.
In their general dissatisfaction for how nice they are.
Well, so I think that's a great question. I think one of the tremendous things about Silicon Valley is that they question everything. And I think what I hope to be able to bring from a values perspective from China is Chinese experience, Chinese history, appreciation for legacy, and a combination, therefore, with Silicon Valley disruptive, transformative, and aggressive nature, sort of a search for sort of balance that might be helpful. But it's going to take a lot of trial and error and experimentation to see what else might be involved. But I think even on a small level, conveying experience, talking about what it was like for a Chinese American to spend these last 10 years in China and to break down some stereotypes and some misconceptions. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked if Google's still in China, and yet Google still has hundreds of employees in China, for instance.
Okay, thank you. Anousheh, so we were together a few months ago, and you said you had to leave to go to Georgia, and I said, well, the flight to Atlanta is not that bad. She said, no, not Atlanta, Georgia, Georgia. And it seems like most of your traction is coming in places that are not known for modernism, right? So why start there?
Well, what we found out is actually when we go to developing countries, they are more open to taking risk and trying new things. We've seen that, especially in technology, a lot of these countries have leapfrogged certain, evolution of technologies and just gone to the latest and greatest type of networks that they are developing, for example, and that, in mobile technology, for example, they have surpassed the number of users in a lot of these countries. So we found better traction when we were talking to service providers, and we sell through service providers, we sell B2B. So we were dealing with very traditional organizations that are very difficult to penetrate and very difficult or it takes a long time to work with them. And we found out that these timelines are shorter actually in some of these countries, and they're more open to our business model where we would share risk with them, reduce the cost of trying out and deploying new services and technologies. And we found that traction there, and we took advantage of it, and it proved to be the right decision.
So the more advanced people, the more advanced potential customers that you're finding are not nearly as interested in going forward fast as the ones in places that we consider, well, we in the States consider backward.
Yes, what we see, for example, in US is a lot of the service provider want to spend about a year just trying things out in their labs before they go out, and by that time they feel like they can do it better, and then they want to own the technology. They don't want you to share in the success with them, so they're not open to the business model that we were offering to them, and that's changing slowly. So end of this year we're going to be launching in US for the first time, and we're excited about that. But it took a long time to convince that the business models have to change in order for this to succeed.
Okay, thank you. And Adam, your products mostly go into plastic, right? Yeah. And you're a green product, and you're selling it in plastic containers. And plastic doesn't decompose and go back into the earth very much, right? No, it doesn't. So what are you doing about that?
First of all, we make all of our bottles out of 100% post-consumer material. So we only use plastic that's been used once before. And actually the subject of my continuance of our Cato Fellowship project, which is a group project, is based around the ocean plastic problem and how we start to address that by doing more of what Method already does, which is use the plastic that we already have on the planet. I think the question is a really good one, not just in what are we doing today, but what is the future of sustainable product development? And I'm a firm believer that a small step taken and executed really well and then repeated, in other words, serial innovation that people adopt, is far more important than trying to dream up sort of the perfect system, because you can usually dream that thing up, but without engaging consumers and engaging people in the change that you're trying to seek, you're not able to actually achieve the longer term goal that you have. So as that relates to plastic, I mean, sure, we're doing some things today that lower the carbon footprint of our plastic by 85% over anybody else in the industry. And that's nice, but yeah, it's still plastic. And the next step is how do we get people to engage more meaningfully in our brand, be loyal to our brand, which they already are, and buy refills for products so that we can make durable packaging. That's something that we're starting to do now. And then even beyond that, how do you actually eliminate the need for a liquid cleaning product or a liquid laundry detergent, for example, altogether by designing the hardware and the software together. And what I find fascinating is that the hard part about that is not, dreaming up those ideas. Those ideas are relatively obvious. The hard thing is actually the product design part that makes these products so desirable that people will and want to adopt them, because I believe adoption is the most important part of the innovation process, and that's what we need in order to create a more sustainable future.
Okay, and you've got a whole supply chain around plastic, right? Can you describe that?
Are you talking about the ocean plastic?
Yeah,
now?
I mean, that's where you're getting your plastic.
So switching to ocean plastic, Method makes a product that is packaged in plastic that we've harvested from the ocean. And we did this as an example of sort of the ultimate recycled material. We did 4 documentary films about it, and now we're turning it into a K-6 curriculum that's already in the public schools in the state of Hawaii and sort of expanding from there. And that's part of the sort of project side. But what it required was creating a supply chain for plastic that happens to be floating in the middle of the ocean, which is sort of one of the strangest things I've ever found myself doing. And without describing it in too much detail, I mean, what we do is we actually work with organizations that are already doing cleanups of a lot of this material. We started in Hawaii, which is in the North Pacific Gyre, which is sort of famous for the amount of plastic it has in it. And what we provide is we've trained them on a way of pre-sorting the stuff that they gather so that they can give it to us and we'll recycle it and reuse it, instead of what they've been doing for years, which is just taking it and trying to landfill it, which in Hawaii they don't have any landfill space left. So that, combined with some special processes to recycle plastic that's been floating in the ocean for 10 years, which is really low quality stuff, we've been able to actually create this real live thing. That's what it really is a symbol. And it's a storytelling device that we use to try to get the rest of industry to follow our lead. That, I was telling you earlier, in the United States, only 24% of the clear #1 plastic PET gets recycled every year. So for every pound that gets recycled, there are 3 that go in landfills, even today. It's kind of astonishing. And Coke, Pepsi, all of our CPG competitors are all using pretty much only virgin plastic, with a very little of a post-consumer sort of mixed in. And if a small company can actually do this and do it with high quality and with clarity and all of that, and recycle ocean plastic, I think it sort of removes the excuses for industry to not adopt a technology that already exists that's far better than what we have, that they just happen to be resisting.
Thank you. Questions from the audience. We have some mics. If you can just over here on the left.
I actually have a question for each of you. So I'll start with Kelvin. You mentioned that you're going to be bi-continent and flying between Beijing and San Francisco. And we have seen a lot of American tech company, or even just social media platform going to China. They didn't quite adapt to China. A couple example, eBay, Neiman Marcus, just name a few. So what are your advice to the other newer company that you're going to approach in San Francisco?
So I think you're right. The first challenge for international companies entering to China has been how and when would they adapt, and how much would they adapt to the local market. So my first advice to anyone engaging with China would be find the right local partners who can give you the advice on how to adapt to the market. That's, in technology, it's trending towards finding a local venture capital firm who has the right business relationships, and then empowering a local product team to make product decisions. In the case of Evernote, which is maybe a open, unfinished case so far, but looks promising for Evernote, I would say. They forked the product. So Evernote China is a completely different product than anywhere else in the world. And I think it's those kind of decisions that give international entrants a better opportunity in China.
Thank you. And I think I'll just say the 2 questions in one time to save some time. So Anousheh, when you were in the space station What was on your mind? Were you
Well,
scared?
we're going to spend a fair amount of time on the space station at the very end of this.
Oh, sure.
Okay,
sure.
so,
Okay.
and before you come in for your third try, let me see if anybody else wants a first. Was there somebody over here that I saw earlier? Right here in the second row down to your left.
Hi, Kelvin. My name is Stijn, entrepreneur from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I've got a question for you because you spent quite some time in China. What do you consider as the most interesting startup at the moment in China?
So one of the challenges in China is that distribution has generally been locked up by the big companies, generally the big three or big four. So I would say, the young products that are the most interesting to me actually are startups that have come from these big companies. So, WeChat, you maybe have heard of Weixin, right? They just publicly announced they have about 400 million active users. That product's, I think, 3 years old. So it's a startup, but launched by Tencent. Other than them, I guess, the taxi cab hailing companies have been a really interesting category that's exploded over the last 2 years. We use Didi Dacha all over the place in Shanghai, and it's become the verb. A product's done well when it becomes the verb. And then the last company I'd say, which I guess maybe is an independent, true startup, is Xiaomi, or now they're using the international brand Mi. It's the fifth largest smartphone maker now, and growing like crazy, and building incredible products across smart home, portable electronics, lots of other categories too.
Miss, or?
My last question is for Adam, and you mentioned you harvest the plastic from the ocean and then you recycle it. Just curious, can you scale that and then, maybe not just on your bottle, but use it as industrial raw material so that, we can just harvest more waste from the ocean?
Yeah, that's actually what we're trying to do right now. So we're trying to create a commodity which is ocean post-consumer plastic. And we're pretty close to that. We started in Hawaii. We now have collection efforts in South Florida, the Atlantic coast, and actually, believe it or not, a little bit in Australia. And what's great is we've created a model that's replicable. So we can kind of train partners and then create sources. Now, you don't want to move plastic too far. So, the supply side of that, there's plenty of stuff to get figured out. But I think your question brings up a really important thing, which is that making plastic bottles out of ocean trash is highly impractical. And actually, if you do the math on the sustainability of it, what we do on all of our other packaging is actually greener, because for a whole host of reasons. And so what we're trying to do by creating commodity is essentially do sort of open source tech transfer. Like, if you can figure out something to do with this stuff, go for it. We did it almost as a showcase and as a communication device, and now we're trying to scale it. But it's not our objective to make all of our plastic out of ocean plastic. That would actually take us in the wrong direction, and I also think send the wrong message, which is the message about the ocean plastic problem per se is that we need to prevent it from happening in the first place, and that's a big part of our communication.
Thank you. All right. So Anousheh has been disruptive in one other regard. There had never been a woman on the International Space Station when Anousheh joined them, and I don't think there has been since then. Is that right?
I think we have NASA astronauts who've flown, but not privately funded.
Yes. So you disrupted the male domination of the space station, and it's a very interesting story. So tell us the whole thing.
Well, in very short time we have, my love of space started when I was very young, and there are two ways that I guess I disrupted. One was on more macro level. What I felt is that, there are a lot of children that grow up with the dream of going to space, and their dreams are unfulfilled because only governments were the means of access to space through their government-sponsored space program. So I became involved with the X Prize Foundation prior to founding my company, and launched the Ansari X Prize to disrupt the whole space industry and create a new venue for private space industry to flourish. And that has succeeded greatly, and we celebrate the 10th anniversary of winning of that prize. And as a result of a lot of advocacy, a lot of discussion with the policymaker, a new set of regulations were put in place where companies like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic resulted out of all those changes that happened on a macro level. On a more personal level, I had the privilege of flying to the International Space Station in 2006, and I flew with the Russian space program. And even though the first woman who flew to space was a Russian cosmonaut, Valentina Tereshkova, and they had one more woman who flew. They didn't have anyone else in the program. So when I arrived there, they were not very open in having a woman train with them. So I had to disrupt the whole training program and their whole training facilities in order to be able to accept it. And they
Tell them how they hazed you.
So they really didn't want me to in the program. So you have to go through a set of tests to be accepted in the program. And one of those tests was a centrifuge test. And usually the first time you arrive there, they do a 4G test. So they put 4 times the force of gravity on you to test you. So they told me we're going to do a 4G test. I woke up in the morning, prepared for it. I went there, and as they're putting me in the straps in the seat and everything to put me in the equipment, they tell me, oh, by the way, we decided we're going to do a 9G test today. So I didn't know how this will impact my body and everything, but I was determined that I'm not going to fail this test. So I didn't. And thank you. And that's, I think, when they started changing their mind about me. It's like, she's not going to leave us alone.
And how did you get the news that you had made the space station?
And when I started actually training, believe it or not, I went there to just train with the astronauts as a backup, and I wasn't scheduled to go to space. But just being there and being with the astronaut was good enough for me. And what ended up happening, which I believe this is the law of universe helping people who want to do something that they feel passionate about. As I was getting ready to pack up my stuff and go home, on the way to the airport, they called me and they said that the person who was supposed to fly had developed a medical condition, so he can't fly, and if I would be willing to take his seat. And first I thought it's a practical joke. When I found out it's not a joke, I think I screamed the loudest I've ever screamed. And the rest is history.
Thank you. Okay, we are out of time for this segment. Thank you very much, and thanking again our disruptors here. And then next will be Eric Motley, Vice President of the Aspen Institute. He used to be the managing director of the Henry Crown Fellowship, but he's recently changed to a broader role and left the Henry Crown Fellowship. And he has a couple of poems to share with us, and we will leave the podium. Thank you very much.
Please don't leave. Poetry likes you too. First of all, I need to apologize to all of humanity. We were playing a game called Werewolf last night, and I was totally unaware of how important Anousheh is, and I tried to annihilate her. And so, I'm not Tenzin Smith, and she gave us yesterday this wonderful reminder of the provocativeness of poetry, how disruptive verse can be in our lives. So what is poetry? Poetry is the soul's sincere desire, uttered and yet expressed, the motion of a hidden fire that trembles in our breast. Poetry is the stuff of everyday life. It is a cleaning, it is a walking, it is a cutting of the lawn, it is a cooking of the meat, it is a loving of a friend. We are all poets. And lest we forget, we must also remind ourselves and each other to take great care of the words we use, the beautiful, wonderful words we use. I have 2 poems for you. They're brief, don't worry. The first is written by a poet. And the second is written, well, the second is to illustrate that we all are poets. The second is written by me. Reinhold Niebuhr, who I never can stop quoting, was not a poet, but he poetically said, "Nothing in life is worth doing. Nothing that is worth doing in life can be accomplished without faith and hope. Nothing that is good or beautiful makes complete sense in its immediate context of history without faith. Nothing, no matter how virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we're saved by love." One of the great disruptive ideas of all of time is love. Leigh Hunt was a poet. He was one of those romantics with Byron and Keats and Shelley. And I don't know why some people are airbrushed from history, but he has been. And he wrote the most beautiful and complex of poems, but I've chosen one of his most simple verses to share with you today because it underscores his disruptive idea of the universality of love. Abu Ben Adem, may his tribe increase, awoke one night from a deep dream of peace and saw within the moonlight in his room, making it rich like a lily in bloom, an angel writing in a book of gold. Exceeding peace had made Ben Adem bold, and to the angel he said, "What writest thou?" And with a look made of all sweet accord, the angel answered, "The names of those who love the Lord." And is mine one, said Abu. "Nay, not so," replied the angel. Abu spoke more low but cheerly still. "I pray thee then, write me as one who loves his fellow men." The angel wrote and vanished. The next night it came with a great wakening light and showed the names whom love of God had blessed. And lo, Ben Adem's name led all the rest. Thank you for applauding Leigh Hunt. Now, when you've been down this road before and the lower lights go dim, and the turning of time is tight, the widening way seems wrong, and the unfamiliarity of the song on the radio tells you what time can only teach, you have lost your wandering way, cutting across the long laid lanes, fading into the light of common day, pretending present and past the same. Distraction. To be conscious is not to be in time. The unsettled satisfaction appeasing long forgotten ways once took when we moved through the lanes of life, across the dull brilliance of the land, above the moving trees, not in utter nakedness or forgetfulness, that all is uncertain, fragmented, brightness without light. Nobody knows where you are headed. There are many roads, they go by many names, often taking you back to the very place you came. Pull over, will you, along the side of the road, now, here. Rest for a while. Be reconciled among the stars for the scenes to be changed. Every second, each moment is a new disruptive confirmation that you have come to the very place where the journey is made valid. Look, see through the rearview mirror the pattern as before, which having been must ever be, and will be nevermore. Look, see drifting above your head in the middle, not only in the middle of the way, grace gathering around the setting sun, woven into the wholeness of life. See, you must go through the way in which you are not to go to arrive at what you are not. Thank you. Thank you. Now I have great honor to introduce the werewolf master himself, who is a great writer and thinker of the New York Times, Anand Girdharadas. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Werewolf game later tonight, just in case you didn't know. I'm going to first call up three wonderful panelists to the stage, and then get you moving a little bit before we start talking, but more on that in a second. The first person who's going to sit in that second seat is a radio journalist, Fernando Espuelas, and you can come up, who is transforming how we think about the role of the journalist by practicing what he calls kind of mission journalism, and is really a voice for Latinos around this country. Works for Univision Radio. Second panelist, will sit right next to him on his left, is LaToya Cantrell. Where is she? There she is. Represents the wonderful District B in the City Council of New Orleans. Evidently a very popular city. And last but certainly not least, Secretary Anthony Foxx, the United States Transportation Secretary, who is responsible for all your flights leaving on time from Aspen tomorrow. So a particularly important man. So thank you to them all. Now, I said I wanted to get you moving. So I want, before we start, I want you to stand up. If you're in a relationship, no. Hear me out. If you're in a relationship and broadly speaking, satisfied with that relationship. Oh, sorry. Thank you. You can sit down. I want you to stand up if you are satisfied with the dwelling that you live in, whatever that dwelling is. You like your dwelling. We have a few drop-offs, but okay. Okay, sit down. Now stand up if you are satisfied with the politics of your country. After party in her country. You know, whenever we are in Aspen, it's very easy to imagine the world as a beautiful place where the most difficult decision is whether to first do the renovation on your 8-car garage or your forehead. And when you're here at the Aspen Institute, it's easy to think the world is a complicated place, but full of people who are devoted to solving its problems. But I think something would be missing from this terrific gathering if we didn't bring in politics. And the question of why, after a week of celebrating so many things that are working and people that are working and systems that are working, the systems that we perhaps should be proudest of, the systems that made the country we're sitting in the envy of the world for a time, is something almost none of us stand up for. So today we have three brave panelists who are going to help us think through why our politics doesn't get us standing anymore, and maybe how we can get it back. I want to start with each of you, starting with you, Secretary Foxx. I want to hear your kind of political origin stories, and just very briefly, maybe a moment that you remember, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in adolescence, where you kind of realized that this was a powerful thing to do relative to all the other things you could do, the power of politics.
Yeah, I can remember. I was born in North Carolina and lived most of my early years with my grandparents, who were both teachers. And every week, my grandparents would sit across the kitchen table and they would talk about what the local school board was doing, because they kind of lived and died based on what the school board's decisions were, on curriculum, on salaries, on any range of things. And this conversation sort of expanded when my grandfather retired, he got active in politics on a grassroots level and became kind of a pillar of the community type who candidates would come and try to solicit the support of. And he was, you know, I'd be running around under the kitchen table as he'd be talking to people running for office. And when they'd leave, he'd tell me what he really thought about them. But he would say to me, politics can change things. And I got that very early, seeing his example.
LaToya?
Good afternoon. Well, I was raised predominantly by my grandmother, and who grew up in the Great Depression, and she had a real sense of politics, a love for it, and how we had to be responsible. We had a role to play. And she lived in the Antelope Valley when I was growing up, in the Palmdale area of California. And during this time, when my family integrated there, it was during integration. Black families were moving in. She got involved in that movement, making sure that the community, that she can be acclimated and others could have access, moving to Palmdale in the Antelope Valley. Well, she was active on the Chamber of Commerce. It was the Sun Village Chamber of Commerce. So at the age of 13, lo and behold, I find myself secretary of the Chamber of Commerce. And
was that a paid position?
No, it wasn't. And I was a ninth grader in high school. And I attended Palmdale High School, and predominantly, I think it may have been about 25% African American at the time. And we did have a guidance counselor who was also African American, but in the chamber meeting, I had voiced concerns about African American students being taught and guided to go to college and understanding how that access was there. And so I was speaking at the Chamber of Commerce, and lo and behold, when I showed up at school the next morning, the guidance counselor called me out of my class and said, you have really started something. You're saying that I'm not doing my job. And I said, no, ma'am. I'm not saying you're not doing your job, but I do know a lot of my friends are not on the path to college because they feel that it is inaccessible to them. But that changed. And she began to have workshops and really began to engage the students there that I do believe changed lives.
A story about voice.
Absolutely.
Fernando.
Well, I think I got a chance to really think what that moment was, and it moved back in time to when I was a little boy. I was born in Uruguay, and for the first time in a century or so, there was a very violent coup, and two of my uncles disappeared. We were buzzed by helicopters from the army and so forth and so on. And it was the first time that I realized something terrible was happening, and that the politicians had created it. And ever since, I've been obsessed about politics, and it matters.
So I want to go back to you, Secretary Foxx. You are in an interesting position where you are now a creature of Washington, but only for the last year are you in this cabinet role. I'm curious about what you've learned about the brokenness of the system that maybe you didn't know a year ago. Obviously, you knew what you knew from reading, from experience of other kinds, but what have you learned in this past year about why the system is so broken?
Several things. First of all, politics over my lifetime has become increasingly more narcissistic. And there's a big kind of, let me be the first one on TV or the first one on Twitter to do something. And so everyone's trying to outdo the other. And that's a dynamic that is very, very active in Washington. The second is that we live in an age where anybody can say anything. And you're constantly dealing with trying to get information out and also how you combat misinformation. and that has created a bit of a disruptive influence on our discourse politically. And the third thing that I would say is that, and this is not about doctrine, but I think that in the House of Representatives, it's just a fact that I think that we have what is for many years been an opposition party governing and a party that had been governing in opposition, and just running government, just doing basic things has become very difficult. And so with those three factors, I think we've got the recipe for what we have right now.
So a lot of people talk about the president's social contacts or lack of them with the other side. What about you personally in this year? How many times have you been able to have dinner with a Republican colleague, have them over to your house, vice versa? Is that happening, or is that long ago?
It's actually happening a lot more than people think it is. You know, I have a lot of interaction with Republican and Democratic members of Congress in both houses of Congress. And I know many of my cabinet colleagues do as well, and I know many folks at the White House do as well, too. I don't think it's so much an issue of whether people know each other well. There's kind of a thing of, you know we can't agree with you. We can have dinner and break bread, but at the end of the day, we're going to be over here and you're going to be over there. And it's kind of that way. And I think, you know, this primary system we have that pulls moderate Republicans over to the right, and the gerrymandered districts we have in many states just created more of that disruption.
LaToya, can you talk a little bit about the question of poverty that you often talk about, tweet about, and tell us a little bit here in this wonderful bubble of Aspen. Tell us a little bit about the lives that your constituents lead, the struggles that they go through and come to you with on a daily basis. What are the 3 or 4 on the kind of social front problems you see that may be invisible to people in lovely settings like this?
Well, I don't believe that it's invisible to this room at all based on all the great work that we're doing collectively. But in terms of, you know, poverty, I mean, New Orleans has been known for generations as a city that cared for God. So it's definitely alive and well. So in terms of, you know, housing, job creation, economic development, a city where over 50% of the African American men are unemployed, where crime rate, you know, is through the roof, and just the state of Louisiana is incarcerating more people in the world. So surely these have a significant impact on the daily lives of people. But particularly, I will focus on the post-Katrina environment, to where, in terms of my constituents, they want to ensure that the quality of their life in their neighborhoods and their communities will continue to be improved. So the levels or issues of blight and eradication, I hear about that all the time. Street lights, a big issue. And been able to, what I've been able to do in this capacity now as a city council person, I've only been in this role for almost 2 years. But coming from grassroots, I've been able to make sure that the voices of the people, when it's time for me to either introduce legislation or push the administration to address blight, for example, in the communities, I'll call the troops. And that means the voice of the people. I can pack a chamber. 342 people.
You should have brought them here.
Well, the bottom line is that when you ensure that the voice of the people, that voice is present to therefore push strategies, policies forward, and it's very difficult to do when you're the only voice. So hey, don't make it about me. I make it about the people. And then when I do that, I see legislation, I see movement from the administration, whether it's motor-owned that we just introduced last week, whether it's a revitalized or modified lien waiver program, whether it's a lot maintenance program. These are things that we've been able to do in a very short period of time, because over 342 people packed the chamber, and we stayed there till 9 o'clock at night to hear 92 people complain.
Are people after the trauma of Katrina, though, are people ready to trust government again? These
know,
programs sound great,
Mhm.
but don't they also scare people that it's trusting something that wasn't reliable last time?
Well, you have to demonstrate that you're trustworthy, and you have to do what you say. And I believe that from my ability to be elected and coming from grassroots and being, you know, having opposition to where I was I didn't have the machine behind me. I was outraised 3 times by my opponents. I was able to win the primary, not escaping a runoff, but going to the runoff and winning, you know, that. And taking the lead the next morning after the election, calling my mayor, who wasn't with me, and I called him. We played phone tag. He called me back. He says, "LaToya, this is Mitch Landrieu." I said, "Hey, mayor." I said, "Man, you tried to kill me." And he said, "I did." He said, "But you won." And I said, "I did." And it was, but what I'm saying is, in terms of trust, and showing people and leading people, it wasn't having a vindictive attitude. It was about partnerships. It was about reaching out that hand and showing from that day forward, it was about the people. So we have to demonstrate through action.
I think you would also win if you took a vote right now on moving the Aspen Institute to New Orleans. Fernando, I want to ask you about there was a report from the Pew Research Institute a few months ago that basically talked about what it called the graying and the browning of America. And it made the point that the aging demographic on its own would be a massive change that creates a lot of tension around all kinds of issues. And the demographic change, the change in the average skin hue, would on its own be a massive change that caused a lot of problems. And America right now is going through both at the same time. And that a lot of the tension, a lot of the division, actually it attributed to that. Can you talk about how you see those forces contributing to the paralysis?
Well, I think clinically you have to look at those two forces actually, one being the solution of the other, which is as people age and drop out of the workforce, as is happening increasingly across America, younger people who tend to be, as you said, as Pew said, tend to be browner, are the ones who are going to be paying the taxes in order to maintain the systems that all Americans depend on, certainly when they retire. In terms of the tension, I'm a very firm believer that this is a country where people really do want to get along, but it's also a country where we have more than enough politicians willing to divide us through fear. It is much easier to motivate. It's much easier to motivate people with fear than it is to try to inspire them. And so if you say this group of people are going to, I don't know, start selling tacos in the corner, you know, the world will end, and you must defend this because this is America. And of course, this has been happening since Benjamin Franklin complained about the Germans in Pennsylvania being dirty and dark and wanting to speak their own language and so forth. So it's a...
And their tacos were terrible.
Oh my God. They looked a lot like sausages, in fact. Yeah, yeah. So I believe that this is an issue that it always peaks at certain times. So, you know, pick your ethnic group. No Irish need apply. You know, the Chinese exclusionary laws, Jews, Polish people, Germans, whatever it is. So it happens all the time. The question is how, in this context, political context, as the Secretary said, where there's a tremendous amount of division, can we overcome the force of the politicians who are seeking to use these realities, these empirical realities, and be able to reunify the people behind a common concept?
Yeah. Secretary Foxx, back to you. I want to ask you a bit about your administration as a whole, the president as its leader, but this administration as a whole. And I think there's a feeling you hear among people who voted for the president twice, volunteered for him, thought that this was maybe the third coming of Christ, that you look at the policy accomplishments, people are happy, people say there's something there. But there's a very strong visceral feeling among almost everybody I know who love this president and this administration, that there's something kind of passionless now, and that whether it's responding on something like Ukraine, whether it's failing to come up with ways around the Republicans and changing the poll numbers instead of just executive ordering the way out of it, that there's something a little bit weak and adrift. Do you see any truth in that? Do you see a way for him to have a strong last couple years?
Well, look, I think a couple of things. You know, some folks say his poll numbers are in the 40s. I don't know. I know Congress has a 7% rating right now. And I think more generally, though, that this president has done some incredibly significant things for the country already. The chapter closed healthcare. What he's done through the Recovery Act to increase investment and frankly stabilize the nation's economy and get it back into a position where we have 10 million jobs that have been created since he took office. But we've still got a long way to go. And I think that he's very energized. In the meetings I have with him, he's very focused on running through the tape. And I think you'll see him continue doing that. And when you talk about passion, I was in the White House in February when he brought 21 young black males and Latino males from Chicago in to launch his My Brother's Keeper initiative, which is an initiative basically to try to reclaim these young people who are growing up not only in our urban communities but all over America who have, by data, haven't been graduating from high school, haven't been getting to the 3rd grade reading level on time. And the trend line for folks that have that kind of profile we know isn't good. And so this president, the President of the United States, said, this is an issue that's worthy of my attention. I think it's a real important movement, and I think it shows the passion he has for people in this country.
On your passionate subjects of roads and infrastructure and rebuilding, is there anything beyond, assuming a Congress that you're not going to get a lot out of, assuming how limited executive orders are for perhaps good reason, are there other creative, kind of unexplored ways of making policy, doing big things that we haven't really tested yet? Maybe bringing in private sector, doing things we haven't done to work around a kind of congressional impasse?
Yeah, we launched something called the Build America in Transportation Investment Center, which is the first attempt in the U.S. to actually have a federal government store, if you will, to help get public-private partnerships in infrastructure moving. It's a huge effort, and I think it'll be very successful, and we're just starting to stand that up now. But let me say this, that I haven't given up on Congress, actually. I don't think we can. I've seen the data that tells us that we have 100 million people that are additional in our population over the next 35 years. We're going to basically have to double freight, so those traffic jams that you sit in now are going to get longer if we don't do something and do something quickly. And so the position that I've taken is, and I think the administration has taken, we can't afford to give up on each other. We just got to keep at it and work through these philosophical differences. And I think transportation, getting a highway bill, a long-term bill for this country, is one thing that Republicans and Democrats should come together and get done.
LaToya, and then we're going to go to Q&A, so you can start raising your hands and getting the mics towards you. Your frenemy, Mitch Landry, the mayor of New Orleans.
That's my friend. That's my friend.
Friend now,
That's my
yeah.
partner.
Yeah.
That's right.
So when he was here, I think he was here a month ago.
Yes.
And he said, we're not rebuilding New Orleans. We're building the city we always should have been. What is the city as it always should have been to you?
It's thinking holistically about going back to those social ills that even plagued us before Katrina, the housing, slumlords, allowing that to exist, lack of jobs, really opportunity, addressing race relations, equality. of course, just development, capital projects, but doing it in a manner that's holistic, that we're looking at education, we're looking at transportation, and we're looking at health care and social services and violence intervention. So we're really being smart about it and being very comprehensive in our approach to rebuilding communities and the quality of life for people.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? We have one over there.
For Secretary Foxx, what role can technology like self-driving cars and the technology yet to be invented help with our transportation in America, and what kind of timeline do you see for these technologies helping out?
I think it's a great question, and we are very bullish on technology in the future, and actually as quickly as we can get it deployed safely in our system. You talk about driverless cars. I think that it is very likely that within the next 10 years they will be on the market en masse. We have to set the regulatory framework for it so that we can integrate that technology into our system safely, though. Remember that since the horse and buggy, the assumption has always been that a human being is going to be directing a vehicle, whatever it is. And we're now getting to a point where automation is taking on more and more of the labor of moving a vehicle from one place to another, whether it's a plane or train or whatever. And what we've got to look out for, though, is that as operators, we can't completely disengage. And so we're really, literally, reinventing the relationship between human beings and vehicles as we try to integrate this technology. But I think the future is very bright.
More questions?
Thank you. My question is for Councilmember Cantrell. Just curious about the disruption to print media, and I'm aware of the fact that the newspaper in New Orleans, I think, is printed only 3 days a week. Is that true?
No, that's true.
How is that hindering you in terms of engaging with the folks that you serve, and what creative ways are you finding to get around that?
Well, the Times-Picayune is the paper that you are talking about. And in terms of the community that I serve, and even New Orleans in terms of its diversity, and through the years of when the paper was actually started, was never really perceived as favorable, particularly in the black community, as being balanced. But great paper, Times-Picayune. It is being printed 3 days a week. However, it's encouraged to diversify the market. We have another paper that's daily. It's The Advocate. And I believe that that would not have happened had, the Times-Picayune discontinued its daily rotation. The Advocate is new. And also, hey, we live in, it's technology. And so more people are engaged every day reading NOLA.com and getting the news, but also getting a diversified voice. And that's important.
Gentleman in the back. Oh, well, let's do that because we got a New Orleans connection, then we'll move on. And a very good jacket.
I would be remiss if I wasn't, as a fellow New Orleans, to congratulate LaToya on being up on the panel with everybody, but also to say that some of the things that set the stage for people like LaToya to I should say honest politicians in New Orleans to come to the stage was after Hurricane Katrina, which I lived through and LaToya did as well. There was an election cycle in February of 2006, and everybody was completely just fed up with city council, the mayor, and basically the entire establishment at that point. And there were meetings were held in people's houses. People came together, groups upon groups, and we did this kind of like Operation Clean Sweep, where we literally went after specific people in the city council and got them unelected, and several of those people are now in jail. So setting the table so that there's a clean slate, so that someone like LaToya can come in and take over and move things forward in a clean and healthy way, as opposed to what we we're dealing with for hundreds of years.
The gentleman in the back who waited patiently.
And I'm not from New Orleans. I apologize for that.
No one's perfect.
In light of the paralysis that our country is going through politically, I'm curious as to the panelists' views of whether or not amending our Constitution to adopt the parliamentary system would be something viewed as an interesting alternative.
Let me just broaden your question and have all three answer it, and then that'll close us out. I want you to each give us your dream amendment that you think might help get us out of some of what we're in. Fernando, starting with you.
Considering the systemic electoral corruption that's been brought about by Citizens United, I don't know what the amendment would be called, but it would limit campaign donations, and it would take corporations out of a democracy that's meant for people.
You seem to get 3/5 of the vote right here. LaToya, you next.
Okay, so I believe in the democratic process. I do. I believe that we have to do more work with engaging and empowering our people at the grassroots level. I think there's a big disconnection, and I don't think that we're doing the most that we can do, everyday people in our neighborhoods. I just don't believe that. So I do believe in the democratic process. In terms of an amendment, oh man, I don't know. I don't know right now.
You definitely love the First Amendment, so you're going to keep that one.
Well, I'm not, yeah, absolutely. I don't think about taking away. I think it's maybe adding on, but it would definitely be aligned with a strategy to get more people elected that are still beholden to the values which make our country great and that are really connected to the people on the ground that they're really supposed to be serving. And right now, there feels to be, and there is a disconnection.
Thank you. And Secretary Foxx, close us out.
Yeah, I agree with the Citizens United amendment. I think it has been a negative impact on politics. But I want to finish by saying one thing that I'm paraphrasing Abraham Lincoln, who said that the American people can meet any national crisis if they just have the facts. And I think that one of the big answers here is no matter whether somebody's in a, red district or blue district, I think we've got to just continue working to make sure we're arming the American people with what's coming around the corner, what the issues are, what the facts are, and let them decide. And I think we've just got a cottage industry made worse by Citizens United that shapes public opinion based on a circus mirror, and we've got to change that as an American public. We've just got to demand the real information.
So from driverless cars to New Orleans frenemies to constitutional amendments, we've heard a lot in a short time from our panelists. Please join me in thanking them.